John DeSando.
Classics, let's go to the movies and share some popcorn, soda pop with our friends. Turn off our cell phones and get away. Night or day, it's John DeSando on the radio.
This special edition of Cinema Classics celebrates Ohio Goes to the Movies, a signature event of America 250 Ohio, and is co-produced by John DeSando and Mary Yerina, and hosted by Mary Yerina. Listen to shows Thursdays at 8:01 p.m. on WCBE 90.5 FM. And listen to shows and read reviews online at WCBE.org.
I'm Mary Yerina.
And I'm David Weaver.
And this is Cinema Classics. David, we are talking this week about a film that really made Ohio-born woman, Dorothy Dandridge, a star. Can you tell us a little bit about Carmen Jones?
Carmen Jones, well, for anyone who is a lover of opera, as I am, would know that Carmen Jones was adapted by Oscar Hammerstein II in 1943 from the opera Carmen, and Carmen Jones updates the story to World War II era, and instead of Carmen working in a cigarette factory, as in the opera, Carmen Jones works in a parachute factory. And it's right in the middle of the time of World War II. And all of the characters which appear in the opera are also in this film, just updated again to the 20th century America. And a very important part about this is that Oscar Hammerstein updated this also so that the characters would all be black. So besides Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, this would probably be the most celebrated stage show of its time that featured a black cast. And it was a huge success on Broadway in 1943. And then 11 years later, it was translated to screen by director and producer Otto Preminger, and starred Dorothy Dandridge from Cleveland, Ohio, which is the reason that we are celebrating this as part of Ohio Goes to the Movies, because Dorothy Dandridge was fantastic as Carmen and made history as the first black actress to be nominated in a leading role for the Academy Awards in 1954. She lost, but that was very historic. There had been nominations previously, and of course Hattie McDaniel had won for Gone with the Wind, but this was the first time that a lead actress was nominated.
So, and the adaptation is somewhat interesting because Otto Preminger apparently saw this on Broadway, but he thought that it was too disconnected, if you will. Like it was skit scene, and it also wasn't as operatic. So when he decided to adopt this to the big screen, he went back to the original source material of Bizet's Carmen and brought back more of the operatic nature of it. And as a result of that, a lot of the lead actors, all of whom were established singers, they just weren't opera singers,
Yes,
are actually dubbed. How did that affect your enjoyment of the film?
Well, it's obviously by virtue of the fact, numero uno, Harry Belafonte, one of the, iconic, performers of the 20th century and very well known for introducing calypso music. And so to be familiar with his voice as I was, but to hear the voice of Laverne Hutcherson coming out of his mouth. But I have to say that he did a fantastic job. Dorothy Dandridge, same thing. She was very much more of a sultry chanteuse type of popular singer, and very elegant, singing in nightclubs, and that actually kind of, at one point made Otto Preminger think that she was not the right person.
That's true.
To play the part. But wonderfully, for her, the singing for her was dubbed by Marilyn Horne. At the age of 20, a decade before she would go on to make one of the most celebrated careers in opera of the 20th century, most famously for her Carmen at the Metropolitan Library. So she got a little bit of a head start.
A little bit.
Here on this with Carmen, and a number of the other singers as well were not singers. The thing I find very interesting in the quintet, the very famous quintet, of Carmen, which in this show is called Whizzle Along to Track, the quintet. The singing voice of Roy Glenn, most famous for playing Sidney Poitier's father in
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I had not seen him in another film that I remembered. When I saw his face, I was like, I know that face.
Yes, and so Roy Glenn was not a singer, so his singing was dubbed by Brock Peters,
yes,
who's in the film in a non-singing role.
Yes, as Sergeant Brown, I think his character's name was.
Yes.
And Brock Peters is famously remembered for playing Tom
Yes.
in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes.
So it was fun kind of seeing all these actors,
Yes.
Including Diane Carroll, I think in her first film role.
Yes.
As a supporting role and as the character Myrtle, and then Pearl Bailey
Yes.
also plays one of Carmen's friends and was not dubbed. She actually sings her songs in this film.
Pearl Bailey and Olga James, who was actually a Juilliard-trained soprano,
Right.
sang the role in the opera of Michaela, but in this version is Cindy Lou. And fortunately, they kept in her beautiful aria, which is towards the end of the show. And so, and Olga went on to star with Sammy Davis Jr. a few years later in the Broadway hit Mr. Wonderful, introduced the song Mr. Wonderful. So she actually did have quite of a singing career herself, as did Diane Carroll.
That's true.
And Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte went back to their own particular genres. Interestingly, Brock Peters menaces Dorothy Dandridge again in Porgy and Bess, playing the villainous Crown, in which he did get to sing for himself, which was wonderful.
The result of this film, you mentioned it was very successful in the box office and made several of these actors stars. But in listening to an interview with Diane Carroll, she talked about the reality of making this all-black cast film. In Hollywood at that time, we're in the mid-1950s, things are still pretty segregated. So the context of making the film in and of itself was pretty amazing. Otto Preminger couldn't find the backing of a major studio and was going to self-produce it because he really believed in it and wanted to make it. And it wasn't until the 11th hour that Zanuck, who was CEO of 20th Century Fox, agreed to back the film financially, allow him to make it independently, and then gave 20th Century Fox the right to distribute it. So that hurdle was covered, but Diane Carroll said, after they shot the film, they realized that all the white actors that they were interacting with around the studios all had contracts and were guaranteed their next work. None of these actors or actresses did. And so they all just went back, as you said, to their careers. And it still was a struggle for many of them until the studio system broke down, until the 1960s, where we had the civil rights movement, for them to get the type of work and level of work that was commensurate with white actors who would be in a very financially successful film, a nomination for an Academy Award, and those types of things just did not happen for Dorothy Dandridge and the rest of the cast of Carmen Jones. So that's a bit of a sad commentary, if you will, on that era of filmmaking.
Yes.
But it makes you appreciate the context in which they made this film.
The fact that this film was, as you said, a wonderful success, but I am guessing this probably had very limited engagement in the South.
Potentially.
Yes, because one of the things, of course, one of the reasons why, just to use another example, of a great singer at that time, Lena Horne. Lena Horne, most of her films for MGM would be guest shots where they could be edited out. In the South, obviously, Carmen Jones, you cannot edit that out, you know, and the famous thing that Denzel Washington said, you know, when Sidney Poitier was honored, you know, with the AFI, said you could not cut Sidney Poitier out of a Sidney Poitier movie. So, and that was the way that it was with this, you know, from start to finish. And so, really, it's that sort of thing, like you said, it's almost a relic of its time. To say here was just, you know, a decade later, things would change. But at this point, you know, it was, you know, if you think about in context, 1954 Carmen Jones is released, and that is the same year that Brown v. Board of Education was settled. Within a year would be the sad murder of Emmett Till, the bus strike in Montgomery, Alabama started, you know, by Rosa Parks. So things were just on the cusp of changing at the time this film came out.
And also, moving beyond that, we're still in a very moralistic era of filmmaking, and the Hays Code is in full force.
Yes.
And we have this story of Carmen Jones, who's a vixen and a seductress, and they really push the envelope in terms of how they implied that sexuality and sensuality. They also, Otto Preminger was notorious for really pushing that envelope because he completely disagreed with the Hays Code and even fought over the making of The Moon is Blue.
I believe, wasn't this not too, and everything, this was not that long after The Moon is Blue.
Exactly.
Which is supposedly, you know, the film that was the first one that just said, we're not going to worry about it.
Yes, and that led to a lot of his producing things independently. But to his credit, he found ways, oftentimes just ignoring the Hays Code enforcer and producing the film that he wanted to produce. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the film and Ohio's own Dorothy Dandridge on our podcast, Double Take. So I hope our listeners will continue to join us for that conversation. But for Cinema Classics, what would you recommend about Carmen Jones?
I would definitely say see it. The music is fantastic. The performances are wonderful. Discounting the fact, you know, that you're seeing singers that you may be aware of were singers and everything, and they are having their voices dubbed and everything, but wonderful performances, especially by Dorothy Dandridge.
And I would agree, it's a historically significant film. However, not being the opera lover you are, I think our listeners should be prepared that it is truly an opera on film. But there are many, many reasons to see it, and you can see it streaming on numerous services. So thank you for joining me for Cinema Classics.
My pleasure, Mary. It was fun to talk about this.
I'm John DeSando.
Classics, let's go to the movies and share some popcorn, soda pop with our friends. Turn off our cell phones and get away. Night or day, it's John DeSando on the radio. We'll watch the credits from up high and low. Cinema Classics on